Hello, welcome to a Proper Gander podcast featuring your host, Luc Willis. Today I'm joined by Walter Gyger. He is the former Swiss ambassador to Russia, India, and Turkey, as well as Senegal.
Hello, everybody. Thank you, Luc, for inviting me.
Thanks for joining the Proper Gander podcast. As I understand, you currently have a book out called Dare We Hope, which is a recollection of your own insights in the current geopolitical world, as well as stories from your political career throughout the years.
Yes, you are right. You see, many ambassadors are writing their books with nice stories about the diplomatic life. I thought that I want to share what diplomatic life has taught me.
Mm-hmm.
Therefore, insight.
And is it so? Who else do you know is making one? Is Sergei Lavrov writing a book right now, or is he? He's got several out, or Anthony Blinken. Is everybody trying to make the New York Times bestseller?
Oh, there are many, numerous ambassadors who are writing books
Yeah.
because it's an exciting career. You meet so many interesting people. You make so fascinating experiences. So it's normal that you want to share it.
Yeah.
But what I haven't found on the market yet is what this diplomatic life has taught me. What have I learned during my diplomatic life? How can this knowledge contribute to maintain peace in the world? Because if you look at the present day situation, you have all the reasons to be concerned. What will happen to you? What will happen to your family? So I'm convinced that we have the knowledge to make a better world for all of us. But why is this knowledge not used when political decisions are taken? That's my big question. And therefore I have written the book that nobody should ever say we didn't know how to avoid a war. We know exactly how it can be done.
And in your book, you mention a lot. It's a warning, clearly, to the world. Are these particular times any more perilous than they were 30, 50 years ago, 100 years ago? What's different about now that is different from our World War One era, World War Two?
Look, when I had your age, I had a lot of confidence in the future. The economy was growing, technology was developing. I didn't have any worry to find a job. You know, during my time at universities, companies came to the university to take us. So it was not, the competition was on those who were offering the services. Today, a lot has changed. And I think, you know, I have experienced during my lifetime the end of a big cycle. A new world is preparing. And it is important that we do not start this new world just with power politics, because this would lead us to new wars.
Mm. And what specific lessons from history do you believe are most urgent for today's policymakers?
Most urgent is not to forget the long term. You see, political developments are by nature long term developments. Of course, you can say when a war breaks out, it breaks out from one day to the other. But there was a long time before. So, if you have a situation as we have today in Ukraine, for instance, of course we have to do everything to stop this war. But this is short term thinking. We need to have a vision. what should the European security architecture look like in 20 years? Peace is not just the outcome if we solve short-term problems. Peace has to be the vision in politics. And if we have this long-term vision, then we can make it. So my advice, never forget the long-term consequences of your political action.
You think this kind of forgetting of the history that a lot of politicians go through today, is it because there's such a focus on quarterly returns and economic prospects that are very short term in in gain, but long term it just is at the detriment of an overall course that we would take, but not necessarily the most profitable one.
Well, short-term thinking, of course, is due also to the public. You see, and I include myself in this public. When a problem appears, we are expecting from our leaders to solve the problem. Not tomorrow, but today.
Mm.
So the human expectation is very short-term. Now let me to be very clear. If a house is burning, firefighters have to extinguish the fire. This has to be done. But it's very important to think before a fire breaks out, how can one avoid that a fire can break out?
Mm.
And when we start firefighting, we should already have in our mind how can we avoid that a worst like this happens again. Now, returning to your remark on history, you see, you can very often hear history repeats itself. I say no. History is made by humans. And humans continue to repeat their errors time and again. You can go back to the old Greeks to see the same political errors which are made today, they have also made. So time has really come to learn from history. And to learn from history, those who have made experiences in international politics must share not just the nice anecdotes, but what life, diplomatic life, has learned them.
Mhm. And what could you tell us about the linchpin tool that you make mention of in your book?
I have 5 tools in my book. Perhaps we can go through all these 5 tools. The linchpin tool is what is taught at universities. This is the existing rules-based international order. Now, what we have today are 2 competing systems with different rules to solve a conflict. You see, in a legal system, if somebody does not abide by the rules, you have the court system which is applied, authority will intervene, there will be a condemnation and so on. Of course, at international level, we do also have these international courts, international criminal courts, and so on. But we have another system in parallel, and this is power politics, which we knew from the 19th century, which we knew from the 20th century. And this is that we have a confrontation of forces. Therefore, I have added to the linchpin tool a second tool, the compass tool. We need to understand what is going on in this world. Only if we understand the processes, we can influence them.
And if you could as well, we could also speak a little bit later about the other tools. But when you mention power politics and the other side of it, which is, you know, the ICC, ICJ, the kind of, as I kind of call it, the salad dressing of diplomacy, where it's more, it has a more of an air of sophistication and, you know, more soft power, whereas power politics has always been looming in the background. You know, the hard power, military power, that's always been implied as a threat by governments. And now, in a sense, I think with the internet and communications, this mask that especially Western democracies have been able to use to project their power has kind of fallen off, especially with Donald Trump making overtly uh, aggressive uh, annexation level threats for Canada, Greenland, and currently Venezuela. And has the mask just fallen off? Do people just not believe the ruse of Western democracies now? Is it that's why we're returning to power politics?
Yeah, it's a little bit more complicated. If you look back in history, after each big war, structures were created to avoid that this happens again. See, after World War II, UN was created. After World War I, we had the League of Nations. After the Napoleonic Wars, we had the whole system of the Vienna Congress, a concert of nations. All was oriented to avoid the use of force. Now, people, when time goes on, they forget the suffering. And they think, well, just to abide by rules, we have other ambitions. And then, of course, a rules-based order needs rules which are accepted by everybody. Now, let's be frank. After the Second World War, you had mainly the European powers, you had Russia, you had the United States. What we call today the Global South didn't yet have an own voice. And China didn't have the power it has today. So what has happened is that the whole balance of power existing after the Second World War has changed. When the balance of power is changing, of course you have again a confrontation of competing powers. This is what we are living in. But I remember pictures mainly at the beginning of the First World War, where you had people in the streets welcoming the war. So you see, the human brain is short term, and it's very easy to forget what war really means.
And you mentioned, you know, so it's sort of changing of the guards, and the old world of the post-World War II order is fading. We're entering a new age, and you could say there's two. Would you say there's two competing factions once again in the style of the Cold War, but this time the ideas are different. It's not communists versus capitalists. I've been told it's traditionalism versus uh, let's say liberalism or something to that extent. And I wanted to know what you thought. What are the lines being drawn?
Change is permanent in international politics. There's always been change. if you have change, you have losers and you have winners. The losers, those who are fearing to lose, who have the perception that they will be on the loser side, they will do everything that the system is not changing. Those who are expecting to profit from change will do everything they can to accelerate the change. Now, what we have today is we have very strong forces of change. The leader, I would say, is today certainly China. It's certainly also the global south, which is not prepared to continue to accept this dominance of the former colonial powers. And then we have more conservative forces. You see, to come to Trump, because you mentioned Trump, he wants to turn the wheel back. He wants to make clear that America again is the number one worldwide, with no competition of anybody. Well, you cannot turn the wheel back. This is not possible. Change is permanent. And we know today that the Chinese economy, depends what values you take to measure it, will be bigger than the US economy about by 2030. This is a fact. Other Asian economies are catching up very fast. If you think at India, Brazil, but also Indonesia, with a very high growth. So the center of the global economy is shifting. Mm-hmm. And we see what will be the future of Europe. The potential of Europe is huge. But Europe is very divided in spite of the European Union. But just to come back to Trump, you know, if you have to develop such an aggressive policy, this means that you feel threatened. Otherwise, you would choose another approach. Mm-hmm. So it's not a sign of strength, in my view. On the contrary.
Mm-hmm. And, you know, I wanted to kind of link what you mentioned, you know, there's the global south that's emerging, then you have the former colonial powers, and then you have this other movement within, I guess it's a global movement, but there's a conservatism is rising, Christian conservatism especially. And there's a clear link between, and recently between Russia and the US. They've been aligning themselves very much so on their Ukrainian policy. Um, and I think as well, you know, on the internet, you get to see a lot of, you know, MAGA influencers. And a lot of them embrace the traditional aspect that Russia has been promoting on the internet, especially in the West. And I'm curious as to what you think your take is on this rapprochement between Western conservatism and Russia, uh, who were once mortal enemies during the Cold War, but now we're seeing these two factions kind of coalesce. And what do you think of that?
You see, the Russian attack on Ukraine was also a clear sign of weakness. Russia felt threatened by the progression of NATO and the European Union in its western neighborhood. Now, why So Russia also, and Putin in particular, he wants also to turn the wheel back, as Trump wants to turn the wheel back. So in their approach, they are very similar. They understand each other. It's absolutely the same logic. So therefore, let's make a deal, and the people who understand each other.
Yeah.
Now, but you are absolutely right, Luc. We have a very strong movement of conservatism. These are all people who want to preserve something. They feel a world in which they believe threatened. So they want to strengthen their world. But you see, you cannot halt change. You cannot stop change. This is what certain people would like to do. What happens in this situation? You see, water is flowing all the time. If you stop the flow of water, what happens? It's dammed up. So this is like a dam. You try to stop change. But as the water is continuing to flow, at a certain moment, the dam will break. So it's a very important lesson which I develop also in my book, Dare We Hope. We can hope if we know how to adapt to change, not by blocking. Of course, there are certain values which are of utmost importance for me. For instance, the respect of human rights, democracy, market economy. These are my own values. But we cannot defend these values just in blocking the evolution. We have to know what we want to keep and what we are ready to accept. And as the power balance is shifting, we need to have a more inclusive approach. Just look at the world, look at the development of the world, have a long-term view, and you see that no country, not even the United States, today is able to solve their problems alone. So it's very important to come to a cooperative approach, but to an inclusive approach, which also includes, I was ambassador in Western Africa, and I can tell you, these are very motivated, very intelligent people, and they are not ready just to accept to be told what to do. So the world will change, and we have to go with this change and try to make the best out of it.
And do you think the European and American powers, should they kind of abandon this sort of condescending teacher role that they often undertake when they go to, global South countries? They tend to project their own rules onto them, and they say, "We need you to go to do this, like this," but clearly it doesn't advance any actual progress. It's just another way of imposing rule. And what do you think of that? Do Western powers need to abandon their sort of colonial missionary mentality of telling other countries how to live their lives?
Whether we like it or not, our Western value system is not accepted anymore all over the world. And you are absolutely right. Other countries, mainly from the global south, but of course also China and so on, they are not ready to accept lessons from the former colonial powers and the Western world.
Yeah.
Therefore, we need to have this inclusive approach. You see, to come back to my book, I say, there we hope that humanity will not destroy itself. The last part of the book is dare to hope. Yes, we can hope. The first condition, and this is not an idealist who is speaking, is just to respect each other. Is a demand to respect each other idealistic? I don't think. This should be normal behaviors among humans. It should be normal behaviors among states. When you respect the other, this means, well, he may have some reasons to think differently. He may have other values, but this does not mean that you accept everything. Respect is the first step. Respecting allows you then to understand the motivation. And this is very important. Understanding the motivation again is not accepting what others are doing. We also need to understand our own motivation too. You see, Western countries and Western politicians, since they believe that they have the truth, that they know everything, they just see what should be done. It doesn't work like this. We need to understand our own motivation. Yes, we have reasons to feel concerned that we have to share our wealth more than in the past with other countries. We have to share more our power, our influence with other countries. So, accepting this, knowing your motivation, understanding the motivation of the other, this creates a basis for talks, for cooperation. And then you can work out a compromise.
Yeah, I wanted to touch back a bit upon how, you mentioned how the way people should treat each other in their own lives is the way that countries and states should treat each other in diplomacy and on the world stage. And I wanted to kind of float by you this idea of states being organisms, superorganisms, in the sense where you can compare them to an ant colony. As ants kind of are individualistic on their own, but really together they make up a giant organism that
So we are the ants.
we are the ants. Not to call us ants or anything, but to an extent, how do states behave like organisms in an ecosystem? Because we need resources. Uh, you know, I would actually compare them more to bodies. I'd say humans are more like cells than necessarily ants. And we need cells need energy. They need to keep moving. They need to work. If cells stop working, then the body shuts down. And yeah, I wanted to know your take. What do you think? Are states organisms, superorganisms?
I think we can compare the behavior of states with human behaviors. I would speak of systems. When I made my studies, my professors were strong believers in systems theory.
Okay.
So it's clear that the global community is a super system. States, again, are complex systems, again composed by subsystems. But what we shouldn't forget is politics. All politics are made by humans. and human behavior is always human. So you see, it's the same motivations you feel as an individual. Politicians are human beings, normal human beings, with the same emotions, the same feelings. So there is a lot of emotions in politics. And I completely agree so with you. Yes, we can compare the behavior of states with the behavior of human beings. And this brings me to the last tool, if I can. This is the ladder tool. You see, at each level of politics, one has the impression that the leaders think this is the whole world. For a national politician, you have the impression that it's the national level. And of course, he will be elected or re-elected at this national level. If you speak with some people working at international organizations, for them there is this global community. They just see the international level. And if you lead, I participated at many international negotiations. Of course, there you tend to forget the other levels. Do I have time to tell a little story?
Of course. Please.
Well, I was ambassador in Western Africa, in Senegal, the Gambia, Mali, and so on. Then in Guinea-Bissau, fishermen explained me how they have more and more difficulties to have a catch, to fish. And they complained about the very efficient Senegalese fishermen who came fishing in their national waters. Back to Senegal, I spoke with fishermen from Senegal. They said, well, you know, you have now these huge vessels, fishing vessels. They are taking away all our catch. So we go to Guinea-Bissau because we can catch some fishes. Now, you know why these big fishing vessels were there?
Why?
This was the question I asked at the Senegalese Foreign Ministry. And they explained me, yes, it's true. We had to conclude agreements with China, South Korea, Japan, to allow them to fish in our broader maritime zones, because we have concluded a debt resettlement agreement and we have to repay our debts. So I continue my story. A few years before this, I was Swiss representative at the Development Assistance Committee of OECD in Paris. And in this capacity, I participated in debt rescheduling negotiations, which were led by the World Bank and the IMF at the Paris office. And it happens, by coincidence, that I participated at these debt rescheduling negotiations with Senegal. And we had the impression that we were very generous. A big part of the debt was cancelled, the rest was rescheduled, but they had to commit themselves to pay back the outstanding debt. I can assure you, nobody in this room was thinking that this would have consequences for the fishermen in Senegal or Guinea-Bissau. This is the latter tool. You have the reality on the ground, and then you have this top, and to see from this global perspective, what are the consequences on the ground? This is very, very difficult. And it nearly happens never. And you see, among diplomats, there is a saying, think globally, act locally.
Yeah.
I say this is not enough. We have to think locally, bring this local thinking at the international level and act there. If we just decide at international level and say at local level they just have to implement, it will not work.
Yeah.
And this is another very important conclusion. It's a very important tool I mentioned in my book. But you see, you have today a frustration of common people with international politics. And this is not only the case in Switzerland, it's a case in the United States. It's a case all over. Look at the Rust Belt in the United States. Why have all these jobs disappeared?
Yeah.
But just now to reintroduce taxes, you cannot turn the wheel back.
And I mean, I don't know how much you're reading up about this currently, but how do you think AI can change the way diplomacy is conducted?
Well, IA can help a lot. It has access to a large database. Artificial intelligence cannot do the thinking at our place. But it can find out much faster than the human brain what would be the consequences of certain decisions at certain levels. But artificial intelligence is emotionless. And when you negotiate, emotions are playing a very important role.
Yeah.
So you cannot just say to your system, find the best solution. Human beings are much more complex. And it's not just artificial intelligence. There is also emotional intelligence.
Absolutely.
And you see, so artificial intelligence can help a lot if it's used by humans.
Yeah. And do you think there's there's been, for example, rumors that some leaders aren't real. Some of them are AI generated. Do you think it's a possibility that one day we have a government completely run by artificial intelligence?
No.
No? You think there's always going to have to be a human at the driver's seat? Is it that innate hunger for power or wealth or legacy that makes us humans do what we want to do?
Well, artificial intelligence, even if the machines learn themselves, they need their programs. You need to ask the right questions.
Right.
You need to fix certain limits.
Yeah.
I think there was a film I have seen. Artificial intelligence could come to the conclusion that in fact the most disturbing and dangerous factors on planet Earth are human beings.
Yeah. Yeah, I guess they're not wrong.
So no, you see, there are. When you look back in history, and this is, I really think we should learn from history. We always feared new things. It's very interesting to see certain decisions when the first railways were built, when the first cars came on the market. The limit, the speed was limited at certain moments in certain countries to 20 kilometers an hour, because they said if it's faster, this damages human brain.
Yeah.
Even if a velo,
Yeah.
even if a cycle was faster.
Yeah.
So you see, at the moment, we fear what we do not know. And I spoke a lot about changes. What is going on in the area of biotechnology, artificial intelligence? This will change completely, not my life, but your life, Luc. And at the moment, we do not have a clear vision of the future.
Yeah.
And therefore, we fear. There is a lot of fear that everything we know will change. And this again explains, I come back to the question you had said of conservatism. People fear, they want to preserve what they know.
Yeah. Yeah, it's the nostalgia is a powerful emotion.
Very powerful, indeed.
Yeah, and especially bringing back actually, the parallel between America and Russia, two of the biggest former empires of the last big confrontation, was trying to maintain their strength. And I wonder if, together we could kind of do a little overview and dissect how each of these governments are functioning right now in terms of pillars of power, let's say. Because I think sometimes it for me it's tough to look at a country and say, oh, America is, it's a presidential federation, parliamentary. But I think it's important to also understand like the factors behind the scenes. I think, for example, the tech barons are very important. The military-industrial complex, and if we could start with the U.S. and maybe move on to Russia, as you explain in your book as well, what holds together the power in these two countries, starting with the USA?
Regarding the United States, I believe in US democracy.
Okay.
And I think finally democracy will keep the United States together. You can have, we have now this situation with a president showing some authoritarian behaviors. But even today, you see that not all Republicans are following him. And the United States, since their creation, was a country of freedom.
Yeah.
Not for everybody.
For everybody.
Not for everybody. I accept this point. But for more and more people,
Yeah.
if you take from the starting point.
It was a slow progress, but we're getting there.
Well, I told you, political developments are always slow.
Yeah.
But you have this feeling of, to be able to influence what is going on in politics. It's very strong in the United States.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so I think this basic philosophy will keep the United States together, and I'm not a pessimist regarding the United States.
So, but I think it's important us also to clear up is that the United States has, to a certain degree, been dominated by a sort of oligarchy. Even in its inception, you have, the oligarchy that George Washington belonged to. Then you move along the times, you have the Roosevelts, for example, belong to another subset of a oligarchy. Uh, the Bush family as well. Trump is a clear example of that. I think he's definitely the richest president we've ever seen in the U.S. And on the other side of that, you have Russia, which was not necessarily was an oligarchy for a long time under the Tsar, and then you have the Communist Party take over for about 70 years, and then a return again to oligarchy. And why is it these two countries are so predisposed to oligarchy? And what are the factions within that oligarchy that are calling the shots? Let's go with Russia, for instance.
It's not that simple.
Yeah, of course.
You see, economic power has always and will always have a strong influence on politics. And economic power in most of the countries is concentrated on a few groups, families, individuals. There was always, now the question is, how big is their influence? It's clear that in the United States, we have an increased influence of these huge companies, but you have also seen how lenient they were in accepting the leadership of their president. Russia, yes, we had, of course, the collapse of the Soviet economy. It was a complete breakdown. Then a few people became very rich. These were the people who had a strong influence during the time of Yeltsin. I would say it's about between 1991, it broke together. Then it took some time for the new structures to build. Now, Putin, when he took over power, he very fast broke the strong influence of the oligarchs. And I had discussions with many of them as Swiss ambassador to the Russian Federation. And it's very clear, they knew exactly that when the Kremlin wanted something from them, they had to deliver. Now, if you look at Russia today and you look back to communist time and the imperial time, traditionally in Russia, the security services played a very important role. Already during the time of the Tsar, one spoke about the Silovikis, the security apparatus who had a strong influence. But on top you had the Tsar. And he could say yes or no. During the communist time, again, the KGB and all the security services, GRU and so on, they were very, very strong. But on top of them, you had the Communist Party, the Central Committee of the Communist Party, which was in control, and who could say yes and no. What we have today is something completely new. Don't forget, Putin comes from the Siloviki. He is a Siloviki. He was head of the FSD. And the situation now is that there is nobody above them. There is no Tsar anymore. There is no central committee of the Communist Party anymore. And the whole parliament, the two chambers, they are very, well, they accept the ruling of the Siloviki. And you see security people all over the world, they think differently. Their business, their responsibility is to look for security. Security people always see their country threatened, all the time, because they have to deal with threats. Yeah. And this explains, you see, the Western, mainly Western Europe, we didn't really understand what was going on in Russia. That the fall of the Berlin Wall and the collapse of the Soviet Union was not the end of history. And so that Russia was not just ready to accept all the rules which Westerners like me think they should be respected. So they have another kind of thinking, and we should have taken this more into consideration. Yeah. I believe that the Ukraine war could have been avoided. We haven't spoken about the Middle East, but this would take too much time. Another war which could have been avoided if people would make a bigger effort to understand each other. Yeah. Understanding does not mean accepting.
Yeah, absolutely. And now that we've talking about Russia's internal structure, the Soliviki, what are their external ambitions, do you think? Is Ukraine the only thing on their mind, or do they see themselves moving out a little bit more towards other countries?
The future will show.
Yeah.
If you look at the Russian forces which invaded Ukraine, it's very clear that Russia was not thinking that a year-long conflict lasting several years will result of this aggression. In their forces planned to walk in the direction of Kiev. They had hundreds of policemen who were supposed to take over police functions in Kiev. They thought Kiev will fall like Prague, like Budapest, or Berlin, East Berlin, years ago. This didn't happen. Now, of course, if Russia just wins the war, if Ukraine collapses, if Western Europe withdraws to support Ukraine, this may create appetite. You see, amongst the forces I mentioned, it's not just the forces of change and the forces of conservation. A very important force is the force of causality. Everything what a state is doing has causal effect. But this force of causality is the counterweight to it, or it can be broken by agency. Trump is a leader using his agency to the maximum. So agency can be used to break causal chains, but really to read what would be the consequences, you have to see what exactly happens. But if Western Europe shows sign of weakness, shows signs that they are not united, this can create appetite in other neighboring regions.
Yeah. In a sense, it's a bit like a domino effect, where once one country does it, and I mean in terms of just blatant annexation, that kind of it's kind of jurisprudence, right? In the sense where that's the right use of the word, where now countries are going to just replicate it, and now you see it with Trump and Venezuela. And have you heard about the revitalization of the Monroe Doctrine under the new name, the Don Roe Doctrine, where the Americans are increasingly pulling out of the Middle East and Europe, clearly. Especially even now, Israel as a topic in the United States does not have the support that it does even 5 years ago. It's like conservatives in the U.S. are, making their distance from the region in general. So Europe, Middle East, and now they're pivoting towards the Pacific and Latin America. Why do you think they're just gonna? Why do you think it's important for them just to maintain their footholds in just two of those areas and not the other two?
These are political decisions. I think you are absolutely right to mention the Middle East. And since the Iraq War, I think during the Iraq wars and shortly after, when you had then the big war against terrorism after 9/11, United States had about 1.2 million service people in this area. And already Obama wanted to reduce the presence. And it was clear with the Abraham agreements that the United States were thinking that this role of balancing out various forces could be played by Israel. But with this war against Hamas, it will be very difficult for Israel to play such a role. It's clear that there is, you see, the United States feels a big threat from China, also in Latin America. And it's clear, on the Pacific coast, China is very present. And the belt, if you look at the sea roads, they are going from China also to Latin America, then there to the American continent and further on.
Thank you for sitting down today and listening to us, and a big thank you to Walter for joining us. The rest of the juicy information that was told today can be found in his book, Dare We Hope, available on Amazon and to a Swiss bookstore near you.